In just 89 seconds, $227 million in FBI reforms crumbled. Kash Patel didn't answer the question. He froze completely. Cameras captured everything. America watched their next FBI director fail the most basic test of democracy. What happened when a simple Constitution question destroyed the career of Trump's most trusted enforcer? At exactly 2:47 p.m. on February 18, 2025, Committee Room 216 in the Hart Senate Office Building buzzed with anticipation. The confirmation hearing for FBI Director nominee Kash Patel had been smooth sailing for 3 hours. Republican senators smiled confidently. Democratic opposition seemed weak. Victory was within reach. Patel sat confident behind the witness table, his navy suit pressed sharp, American flag pin gleaming under the harsh committee lights. Stacks of prepared answers lay before him like armor, each tab meticulously organized by his legal team. His advisors nodded approvingly from the gallery, checking their phones for positive media coverage already flowing in. The man who'd survived congressional battles, deep state accusations, and media storms was about to meet his match in the most unexpected way. Behind him, FBI officials watched nervously, knowing their futures hung in the balance. Trump's inner circle had assured everyone this was a formality. The votes were locked in. The path was clear. For months, Patel had prepared for hostile questions about his loyalty, his past statements, his plans for the Bureau. He'd practiced deflecting attacks on his qualifications, his controversial tweets, his role in January 6th investigations. What he hadn't prepared for was something far simpler, something that would expose the fundamental gap between ambition and competence. Senator Dick Durbin, ranking minority member, had sat quietly through hours of testimony. While his colleagues grilled Patel on complex surveillance authorities and counterterrorism protocols, Durbin waited. He'd learned something devastating about nominees who focused so much on political loyalty they forgot basic civic knowledge. He'd seen it before, but never this dramatically. Mr. Patel, before we conclude, I have one final question, Durbin said, his voice carrying the weight of decades in the Senate. Patel's jaw tightened slightly. His hands, which had been steady all day, shifted position on the polished table. Something in Durbin's tone triggered an alarm. The legal team behind him tensed, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Can you recite the First Amendment to the Constitution? The question landed like a thunderbolt, not because it was complex, but because it was so devastatingly simple. In a room where Patel had just finished discussing FISA warrants, Section 702 surveillance, and counterintelligence operations, this elementary civics question exposed everything. Silence. 4 seconds of pure, devastating silence that felt like an eternity. The chamber froze. Even the stenographer stopped typing, her fingers suspended above the keys. C-SPAN cameras zoomed closer, their lenses capturing every micro-expression on Patel's face as the moment stretched. The gallery held its breath. Republican senators who'd been confident moments before now stared in growing horror. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. The man who could quote classified briefings verbatim, who'd memorized complex legal precedents, who drafted intelligence memos that changed American foreign policy, couldn't remember 45 words that formed the foundation of American liberty. Take your time, Durbin said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade, offering row to a drowning man. But there was no time. Every second that passed made it worse. Patel's face flushed red. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning. His FBI badge, prominently displayed, seemed to mock him. The American flag behind the committee seemed to judge him. At exactly 2:48:23 p.m., the true collapse began. Patel's knuckles went white, gripping the table edge. The man who'd memorized classified briefings, who drafted the infamous Nunes memo, who'd taken on the FBI itself in congressional hearings, couldn't remember 14 words every high school student knows. His breathing became shallow. The prepared answers that had served him so well lay useless before him. No amount of political loyalty could substitute for this fundamental gap in knowledge. The cameras captured every bead of sweat, every nervous tick, every moment of this career-ending failure. "Congress shall make no law," he began, his voice barely audible, then stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. In the gallery, his legal advisor's face drained of color. Republican senators shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, some looking away in embarrassment. Respecting, Patel tried again, his voice cracking like a teenager's. More silence, the kind that destroys careers and shatters dreams, the kind that gets replayed on cable news for weeks, the kind that defines a person's legacy in the cruelest way possible. Within 37 seconds, the political world exploded. Twitter erupted like a digital volcano. Patel failed began trending nationally, then globally. Cable networks interrupted regular programming. The clip was already being shared thousands of times per minute, spreading across every platform simultaneously. In the committee room itself, the atmosphere had become toxic. Republican senators whispered frantically to their staff. Senator Ted Cruz, known for his constitutional expertise, visibly winced and covered his face with his hands. Senator Josh Hawley, usually quick to defend Trump nominees, stared at his phone in disbelief as the notifications flooded in. Behind Patel, his wife shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She'd watched her husband prepare for months, drilling complex legal questions, reviewing FBI procedures, memorizing talking points about reform and accountability. Never once had they practiced the Constitution. It seemed too basic, too elementary for someone of his stature. CNN's breaking news banner flashed across millions of screens. FBI nominee fails, Constitution test live. Anderson Cooper's team scrambled to book constitutional law experts. Wolf Blitzer called it unprecedented in modern confirmation history. Legal analysts were already comparing it to failed Supreme Court nominations, but none had ever collapsed so quickly over such basic knowledge. Fox News, caught completely off guard, scrambled to explain their former contributors' stunning failure. Tucker Carlson's producers frantically rewrote tonight's show, debating whether to blame liberal bias or acknowledge the obvious. Sean Hannity's team debated whether to defend or distance. Even Trump loyalists struggled to spin this level of fundamental ignorance. MSNBC's Joy Reid tweeted within minutes, "The man who wants to investigate Americans doesn't know Americans' most basic rights. This disqualifies him completely." Rachel Maddow's researchers were already pulling up every civics test failure in political history, preparing a special segment that would run for weeks. But it wasn't just cable news. Local stations picked up the story within minutes. International outlets ran it as evidence of American political dysfunction. The BBC's headline read, "Trump's FBI pick stumbles on basic U.S. rights." German media called it a constitutional crisis of competence. Even allies questioned America's leadership when its law enforcement nominees couldn't pass elementary civics tests. Late-night comedians had material for months. Stephen Colbert's writers were already crafting monologues. Saturday Saint Live producers called emergency meetings. The internet meme machine kicked into overdrive, creating brutal content faster than Patel's team could respond. TikTok videos of teenagers reciting the First Amendment went viral, tagged with "better than Patel." In law schools across America, professors used the moment as a teaching tool. Constitutional law classes played the clip as an example of why basic civic knowledge matters. Bar exam prep courses added disclaimers. Even FBI director nominees need to know this material. By 3:15 p.m., Patel's confirmation was effectively dead. Republican senators who'd promised support began the delicate dance of distancing themselves without appearing disloyal to Trump. Senator Susan Collins, the perennial deciding vote, released a carefully worded statement. Today's performance raises serious questions about basic qualifications. Senator Lisa Murkowski, another key moderate, was more direct. Knowledge of the Constitution isn't optional for FBI directors. Even reliable Trump allies began hedging their bets. Senator Lindsey Graham, who'd praised Patel just hours before, suddenly became unavailable for comment. Trump's Truth Social remained eerily silent. No post defending his nominee. No attacks on Democrats for gotcha questions. No claims of rigged hearings or fake news. The silence spoke volumes. Even Trump, master of spinning disasters, couldn't defend this level of basic ignorance. Behind the scenes, the White House was in full crisis mode. Chief of Staff Susie Wiles fielded angry calls from Republican senators. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt canceled her afternoon briefing. Trump himself, according to sources, was furious beyond belief at being embarrassed so publicly. At 4:22 p.m., Patel's legal team quietly began drafting his withdrawal letter. The same lawyers who'd prepared him for complex questions about surveillance law now faced the impossible task of explaining away constitutional illiteracy. By 6:30 p.m., major news outlets reported the White House was already considering replacements. Names floated included former prosecutors, career law enforcement officials, and constitutional scholars. Anyone, apparently, who could pass the most basic civics test. The FBI director position that had seemed guaranteed for months vanished in 89 seconds of constitutional silence. Patel's decades-long climb toward the pinnacle of American law enforcement ended not with scandal or controversy, but with a question any immigrant taking the citizenship test could answer. This wasn't just about one man's career ending in spectacular fashion. Patel's failure exposed a deeper, more troubling truth about Trump's second-term appointments. The vetting process had focused obsessively on loyalty, not competence, on political alignment, not basic qualifications, on personal devotion to Trump, not understanding of American institutions. Career FBI agents, who'd watched nervously as their potential new director stumbled, privately expressed relief. They'd feared political purges, loyalty tests, and the transformation of the Bureau into Trump's personal investigation service. Now they faced uncertainty, but at least not under someone who didn't know the Constitution he'd sworn to defend. Federal law enforcement, already reeling from years of political pressure from both parties, now faced another crisis of fundament. But this time, it wasn't about bias or partisanship. It was about competence itself. At 8:47 p.m., Kash Patel officially withdrew his nomination in a statement that immediately became a case study in political damage control. His letter cited unfair political attacks and partisan gotcha questions, but carefully avoided mentioning the Constitution question entirely. While I remain committed to reforming the FBI and protecting American freedoms, the statement read, I cannot allow my nomination to become a distraction from the important work of law enforcement. The irony was lost on no one. The man who couldn't recite the First Amendment was withdrawing to protect American freedoms. The man who'd built his career challenging the deep state had been undone by the document that created it. The Constitution he couldn't recite was the same document that gave him the right to challenge institutions, to question authority, to build his entire political identity. Trump announced no immediate replacement. The FBI would remain in limbo, led by an acting director, while the president searched for someone who could pass the most basic test of American civics. The delay sent ripples through ongoing investigations, international partnerships, and federal prosecutions. What began as a routine confirmation hearing became a defining moment of Trump's second term. Not because of partisan attacks or political theater, but because of 14 simple words that every American should know by heart. The moment exposed the difference between political loyalty and civic knowledge, between ambition and qualification. Sometimes the most powerful moments in politics aren't planned. They're not scripted or strategic. They're raw, unfiltered reality breaking through prepared performances. They're moments when the gap between rhetoric and knowledge becomes impossible to hide. In 89 seconds, America learned that knowing the Constitution isn't about politics. It's about democracy itself. When our guardians don't know what they're guarding, we all lose something fundamental. When the people we trust to protect our rights don't know what those rights are, the entire system becomes a house built on sand. The question that destroyed Kash Patel's FBI dreams wasn't complex constitutional law. It wasn't about surveillance powers or investigative authorities or the balance between security and freedom. It was about the first 45 words that guarantee every American's most basic freedoms. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Words that Kash Patel, in the most important moment of his career, simply couldn't remember.